Oh, okay. Um, this is like a broader project that Pari has been engaging and trying to understand local government in South Africa. The project that I worked in with my other colleagues was basically focusing on local government in mining extractive areas. One of the areas that I worked in was Mogalakwena, which 80% of the platinum minerals come from that area. And another area that I worked, it's in Lephalale as well, where coal and the biggest coal station is also there. But also my other colleagues are also trying to figure out how cities are configured and focusing on cities and so on. So this is like a larger project, and mainly really is trying to, our focus was mainly trying to understand institutions in these ideas, and we came across also that social movements were, I mean, we knew social movements were key, but we didn't know at that time that actually they changed not only the fabric of that municipality, Mogalakwena, but also they were tied into the politics and the processes, administrative processes of that area. So I just giving you a background context. And in trying to think through this, first I start with like Castell, although like in 1983 was referring to urban setting, argues there's been a rapid rise of protest demanding public service collection action signifies a change to generalized economic crisis driven by cultural value and political institutions, which has incorporated a rationale aimed at optimizing profit or power at the expense of providing collective goods. And he argues really the three themes that usually these protests and trying to challenge these hegemonic ideas usually have. The first one, he argues, is that demands focus on collective consumption, that is goods and services directly or indirectly provided by the state. The second one, he argues the defense of cultural identity associated with or organized around a specific territory. The third one is political mobilization in relationship to the state, particularly emphasizing the role of local government. And I think the arguments that he posed in 83, more or less, most of the academics in South Africa, they also like sort of follow that logic in different ways. And I think just to contextualize also the South Africa, I think after 1994, the euphoria of the political transition quickly dissipated, revealing, and I think this is a correct quote, a violent democracy in which democratic institutions and forms, elite instability and violence sustained each other. And I think one of the things that has happened 24 years later in the South African democratic state is that the state has not lived up to the expectations of the majority. Struggles over land, housing, and a widespread of other issues began emerging in communities across South Africa in the late 1990s. Most of the things that what happened in South Africa after democracy, for a short period of time, there was a social democrat policy called the LDP, but immediately after it was abandoned, and most of the government started putting in neoliberal policies into the fore. And what happened there, it's like public services such as electricity as well as water were privatized. And what you saw 5 years after the democracy, in Johannesburg in particularly, there was a high levels of social movements, anti-privatization forum, which was fighting against the water privatization. They went to the courts and won a case saying like 60 liters of water should be given for free, then the rest should be buried. But also other forms of social movement came into the fore, like the treatment action aid as well, fighting for the rollout of HIV/AIDS, rollout of medication. And there's been, after that, the biggest public sector strike for the first time in democracy also happened in that particular year. But what you saw from 2009 is the rise of community protest in the townships, shanty towns, in different forms, asking for public service delivery, delivery protest. That's what they called. And most academics in South Africa, at some point, they claim that South Africa is the protest capital of the world at a particular point. So it's within this context that I just bear in mind and try to think about it. So what happens, because I'm having like a conversation as well with the South African academics, and usually they also like have this logic of like neoliberal, then after that privatization, therefore social movement becomes a rise against this hegemonic approach that the ANC has failed to deal with. And what has happened, some of the academics echoes, like one of the most striking features of social movement in post-apartheid South Africa is that many of them I knew and a number of them emerged, as I said, in the 90s. Moreover, they go on, some of the scholars there, about the techniques of mobilization. So one of the academics says, moreover, the rise of insurgency and the techniques of mobilization employed came with mass meetings, drafting of memorandums, petitions, toy-toying, which is coming to, toy-toying is like protesting in the streets, stayaways, election boycotts, barricading of roads, burning of tires, looting, destruction of buildings, and also chasing out immigrants as well as part of it, confronting of them with the police and forcing officials or councillors to resign. So there's been part of that, and they argue really the new wave of social movement is based on the lack of genuine socio-economic transformation. Although I think there's an element of truth in this argument, it is, however, incomplete. And recently we found new scholars like Dawson, who at the same time is trying to attempt to link social movement to the politics of municipalities and the ANC. And her research, she found out that protests are triggered by the intra-ANC rivalries. And the growing factionalism then spilled out into the community in a form of protest. And one of the things that is central to her argument is like patronage is central to her argument. However, hence the competing networks, mobilizing structures of collective action with the aim of gaining resources when their preferred candidates occupy a position of power inside the municipality. So she's locating that this patronage and these inter-rivalries of them in the ANC, protest comes like pushing the councillors into that particular form. So her central, she's looking at the councillors as the key moment of these competitions. However, I think again her argument, I feel like it's incomplete. It's not broadening how the scope. It's true, but it's not broadening the scope of how social movements through patronage, politics of or factional politics of the ANC can affect not only councillors but the core administrative functions of the municipality. And I think the case that I'm going to speak about reflects on that. And in trying to understand this case of this social movement that I'm going to speak about very soon, I'm trying to draw Terreau on contentious politics. And according to Terreau, I hope I'm not butchering his name too much, contentious politics is more focused on the interactions amongst divergent actors. The range of collaboration at times can include a range of different classes, the poor, the middle class, the sprinkle of the elites. However, even though at the forefront of these protests is always the poor, but who are actually in the forefront, but there's a collaboration of these elites. And also he argues that social movements are defined as a fluid grouping. They're not not only are they temporary in nature in terms of their collective action, but also even if they're small, they can actually make an impact to the state. And he argues even small and temporary groups of collective actors can have explosive effects on powerful states. Contagious politics within social movement assesses the spiral of political opportunities and threats. And and he argues that, and which are the same questions that I'm trying to ask myself. Tero asked the question: how does ordinary people take advantage of the incentives created by shifting opportunities and constraints? How do they combine conventional and challenging repertoires of action? How do they transform social networks and cultural framework into action? With what outcome? And how these and other factors combine into major cycles of protest? And how the internet and other electronic communications are changing the nature of mobilization. So using that logic of Taro and the same questions in that, I looked at the Mogalakwena Residents Association, the MRA. That's the name of the organization that I looked at. And what we found when we were doing the research is that this social movement is very embedded into the municipality's administrative processes and the functional policies of the ANC. And through this essay that I'm presenting now, I'll show not only the actors are working outside the state, but are embedded in the governments of local or municipality. They interchangeably used protest administrative processes as well as social media to pursue their interest. So just to give you a background of what the MIA is, I mean, they started in 2012 as a civic movement, basically fighting for local demands. Mainly they were fighting for rates, the bidding rates and taxes of municipalities. So what happened during the apartheid, most of the townships and also rural areas, they were boycotting paying rates and taxes to the municipality because it was an apartheid regime. And when the post-apartheid South Africa, what happened is like the rates and taxes, people still struggle to pay the rates and taxes in the hope that the new government will wipe out all the debts that they failed to do, and they will start from scratch, which in Mogalakwena they didn't do. So the debt that they accumulated during the post-apartheid was added into the new debt in the new in post-apartheid South Africa. So what happened then is like the municipality then started to hire an outsourced company to go to these communities and to recover the debt. And people who couldn't pay, they were losing their houses. And that movement started actually organizing themselves, saying like, we're losing our houses because we were hoping the debt that we had was going to be wiped out, and now this private company is coming to foreclose our housing. So it started from that as a movement. And also what is interesting, but it's a part of like what we find in the social movement, is like some of these members of the social movement also come from historically, or they were activists during the apartheid. They came from political parties, the ANC, the AZAPO, which is a Pan-Africanist, a strand of Pan-Africanist Congress, as well as the PAC, which is the Pan-Africanist Congress. So they have a history of, most of the members, especially the influential members, they have a history of some struggle one way or the other in that particular zone. So, and I think in order to understand how the MRA, from starting as a community-based demands, fighting for the bill debt, they acquired also some local things about service delivery to be embedded into the municipality. I think I should give you a sort of like a context of what happened. So in 2000, since 2011, the municipality has been going through fluctuation of disputes between the municipal manager as well as the mayor. And in the last, what happened in 2014, the expelled mayor forcefully inserted himself as the mayor with the help of the police as well as the armed bodyguard. And this incident was followed by a 3 months strike of municipal officials, during which the majority of the municipal officials and key members of the senior management, including the municipal manager, were reporting to the library outside. This period was characterized by a turmoil in which between 2009 and 2014, the institution had 4 mayors, several unresolved court cases with several acting municipality managers, and a failed attempt by the Department of Corporate Governance and Human Resources to place the municipality under this body, COXTA, this is what we call them, is supposed to monitor municipalities. So it's a provincial unit that monitors municipalities as well, try to put the municipality under administration. And also half of the municipality's councillors, who are ANC councillors, were expelled from the party, and you will get a sense what happened there in that sense. So in all of that chaos of the municipality, one of the key things that has happened is like the debate about the municipal manager's contract. It's a dispute that created such a huge fracture in the municipality and divided not only the councillors of the ANC into two, those who were supporting the municipal manager and those who were not supporting the municipal manager, and the mayors in between, like several mayors coming in trying to get rid of this municipal manager, and also mayors being changed while the municipal manager goes through that. So it's at the very center of that. So, and now you start seeing in that debate the MRA shifting their politics from localized demands and started to focus their attention to the internal dynamics of the municipality. And one of the first things that you start seeing, it's like they start using Facebook, asking, and gradually, I mean, you see the gradual deviation from community-based politics and showing interest in that process. So what you starting to see is the MIA starting to say, we want the mayor to be removed and to remain the municipal manager in the position because he is efficient and he has the skills. So they start using Facebook to do that in that process. And occasionally they will go outside and mobilize some community to go outside to say we want the municipal manager to be reinstated because he, in between that, he was suspended, then he went to court, then the suspension was overturned in that process. And then you start seeing the MIA attending council meetings as one of the ways of doing that. So when they started attending council meetings, they started to have some relationship with the councillors in the municipality as well as the officials. And so certain faction of the municipal manager who were supporting, the councillors who were supporting the municipal manager, wanted to get rid of the mayor. And then they used the MIA to be the ones who were to initiate a forensic investigation. So the forensic investigation indeed was done, and they found the mayor was actually corrupt. So they got rid of the mayor because it became legitimate in that process. But what has happened with that forensic report, which the MIA initiated to be done, which the municipality did, is that the people who voted for the mayor to be out, the ANC councillors who voted for the mayor to be out, voted with the oppositions to get rid of the mayor. And then it splitted the ANC into two: the councillors who voted with the opposition, which is the biggest sin in the ANC. Then it's like the councillors who stayed in the position of the ANC, not voting with the opposition. And in that period, therefore, those councillors who were voted with the opposition, they were recalled. So there was a discipline hearing. The ANC went to the national in that process, and eventually they were expelled from the party because they didn't follow party line in that process. So hold on to that thought. Okay. So while this discipline hearing has been happening against the 23 councillors who voted with the opposition party, then what you start seeing is the province that I talked about, the COGSTA that monitors the municipality, started coming in and wanted to put the municipality under administration. And what that means in practice, it means removing the duties or the powers that the municipal manager has and putting an administrator to control that. But what has happened, what we find out is like this body and the officials or the MEC, the highest person who controls the provincial body, is also affiliated with a faction. So he's affiliated with a faction that wants to get rid of the municipal manager and wanting to strip off those powers through sort of administrative ways of doing it. Then the MRA comes in because they've been attending meetings. They come in, they go to the lawyers, and they go to the court and put a court interdict against this body of the provincial body that monitors the municipality. And indeed, the interdict didn't go through, and that attempt to put the municipality under administration failed. Then what happens? So the municipality is in an impasse where now the MIA as a social movement has won this. The divisions in the ANC is split. The administration it's split. The officials are split between those who support the municipal manager and those who support the expelled mayor in that process. And what you start seeing in that is that then the prominent MIA leaders start to be killed. The key leader of the MIA was killed, and several other MIA members were killed. And when we interviewed, and some of them are in exile, some of them have been running away from these massive attacks that have been happening in the area. So there was a wipe out, literally, of some of the members of this social movement in that process. And most of them alleged that because of COGSTA was trying to put an administration in a failed, in the process of actually trying to get rid of the municipal manager, the province of the ANC is trying to get rid of this social movement, and killings have been a norm in that process, and also inside the municipality in that process. And therefore you find assassinations were happening in sporadic ways in that process. So while that violence was escalating and the MIA were under attack in that process, they realized actually there was a political lull, because they were so caught up for a very long time in the politics of the municipality that actually the connection to the community struggles was actually moving, was becoming dull and lull in that process. So then they realized, okay, since we're not as visible as we were before in the community, they started to change their tactics as well. And part of changing their tactics, they created and registered a political party in 2016 to contest for the local election. And that split the MIA into two, because there were a certain group of the MIA who still felt like they want the MIA to be a social movement, not a political party. And there were certain people who felt that the MIA it's being used by the expelled ANC people so that they can actually run for the elections and get back to the municipality. So it was like a true levels of divisions in that, but at the same time they were using it as a tool to get back to the community and try to understand the community in different ways. Particularly, okay, yeah. So I mean, part of what, when they started doing the MIA, when it became a party, also the language changed. So for the very first time, outside, even on Facebook, when it became a political party, the language changed to like, we are the agents of preserving the constitution. We will fight corruption in the municipality, and democracy needs to be preserved. So it started again using the constitution as part of engaging and rebranding itself in that process. And I think for me, what has happened in thinking about the case of the MIA in particular, is like, in a context, especially in semi-rural areas, where it's the community and the politician are so, and the elites are so closely integrated. Movements are not necessarily fighting against the state, but they get embroiled in the politics that are already corrosive and fragmented in that process. And I think that in the inner fighting of the ANC has permeated into the internal dynamics of the municipality, but as well as the everyday community demands of the people. And I think because of these different factions in these battles, social movement are required to adapt in ever-changing, unpredictable maneuvers using different instruments, and actually sometimes aligning themselves with certain factions in that process. And I think I'm trying to think that maybe like the ways of thinking about the protest, social movements, especially the techniques that they use, is not necessarily thinking about it only outside seeking demands of collective consumption, but it's also thinking about it in the terms of contentious politics and how different alliances move at different times and how context can shape those particular strategies and so on. I'll leave it there for now.